Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another Techno live stream. I hope everybody is keeping well. My name is Dan, and we are going to be hosting this Techno live session with a new guest today. Jack is currently busy doing other things this afternoon, so I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host Nia. Good afternoon, Nia.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I'm really pleased to be here.
No problem. I'm glad. Thank you for joining me this evening. So we're going to just start off today's live stream just covering the usual admin, and then we'll move on to today's session. Now, today's session is actually quite a special one for me, as it is 1 year since I did my first ever live stream. So, for anybody who's watching, who was part of that first ever live stream. Shout out to all of you. It was actually a whole year ago today that we hosted that first session, and so as a bit of a throwback to that, we're going to be doing Gamefroot once again. Gamefroot was one of the first sessions that I did, like I said, a year ago to the day, and that's what we're going to be covering this evening. So to begin with, like I said, I'm just going to cover the usual admin. So this is our schedule going into next week. Jack and the Monday Coding Club is going to be doing some mod trackers. As we mentioned last week, our live stream is going to be temporarily moved. So this live stream has been temporarily moved to Thursday. So Tuesday will be an offline day. Wednesday is going to be my Techno Club, and of course we'll be doing some more Python, so we'll be looking at adding some characters and hopefully some enemies into our game on Wednesday. I realised that I skipped Thursday almost, which is of course going to be next week's Techno Live session. So remember, temporarily Techno Live is now being hosted on a Thursday, and we're going to be looking at AlgoBot, so a different game. And then Friday's Techno Club is going to be held at the usual time, where they'll be looking at various different coding projects. So that's our schedule going into next week. Of course, the links to the Techno Club's website and to the YouTube channel are on the top of the page, but of course you've probably already found us already if you're watching this live stream. So without further ado, we will move into today's Techno Live session, where we are going to be looking at Gamefroot. So hopefully everybody is getting that come through on their screens. Like I said, this particular session is, as I said, a very special one for me, as it's going to be the first, 1 year anniversary for me of hosting Techno Live sessions. Back then, I believe it was called the Techno Club when I first started doing them. Now Techno Club is slightly different, and this is now Techno Live. And like I said, it's a little bit of a throwback to what I did during that first session, which was Gamefroot. Now, Gamefroot is a game kind of development platform where we can use block-based programming in order to produce all kinds of different games. Generally speaking, you can do things like platformer games. You could even do, I think there are some RPGs. There are lots of different types and lots of different tutorials out there that you can follow that Gamefroot have created. I'm going to be quite closely following one of Gamefroot's own tutorials today as we take part in this particular live stream. But one thing I would like to mention is that going forward, you're welcome to have a look at other tutorials that Gamefroot have available and use those in order to create all kinds of different games. Okay. Now, the link to Gamefroot is at the top of the screen here. It's make.gamefroot.com. You can, if you desire, go to Google and just type in Gamefroot. Normally it's one of the first links that comes up. And once you navigate to the Gamefroot page, you will see something like this. Have you done any Gamefroot or any game development before, Nia?
I've never done any Gamefroot, so this is something very new to me. I'm much more comfortable with Scratch. I'd say is like if you asked me to make a game quite suddenly, I would probably jump straight to Scratch. So I'm excited to see like what the similarities and differences are going to be, and yeah, what Gamefruit can offer that maybe Scratch can't, or what it can do a little bit differently, and see why you think this is a good one for a bit of game development.
Absolutely, yeah. So there is, for those of you who are familiar with Gamefruit, some of you will probably already be aware that there are some kind of similarities between Gamefruit and Scratch. But has got kind of a lot more features, in my opinion anyway, that you can use to develop a game. Naturally, Scratch has got loads of different stuff that you can do to kind of develop a game. But Gamefruit has kind of got a lot of functionality that can help to kind of provide maybe a bit more customization, let's just say, of a particular game. Now, first thing that we're going to do once we get to the Gamefruit page here is we're going to click this big Start Creating button just in the center of the screen. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring us to this screen. Now, one thing you can do if you have got an account is you can log in. That's absolutely fine. If you choose to log in and you have an account, that's fine. I'm not going to log in this evening just for the purposes of that we can sort of tailor to the people who haven't got an account. But you're welcome to log in if you so desire and start a new project. And then I'm just going to click on the Start a Platform Game button just at the top of the screen here. And that's going to launch, and it might take a bit of time, but that's going to launch into this kind of screen here. Now I'm going to close this tutorial window by just clicking on the X. And the other thing that I'm going to do as well is, what you'll notice is that Gamefruit has already provided us with some kind of basic customization, like basic kind of features already. As we're going to be programming this evening by basically creating our own, by making our own scripts and things like that, I'm going to remove all of these levels so that I can just essentially start a new kind of game from the beginning, so to speak. So what I'd like, if you are following along at home, what you can do is go to the Levels tab, which is just on the left of the screen here, and if you click on the cogwheel, you'll notice an option to remove level just down here, and I'm going to do that with both of the levels that are there already. So I'm just going to click on the cogwheel and remove level, and then I'm going to be left with a screen that looks somewhat like this, with the last level still shown. If I click on this plus symbol just here and create new level, that will then launch a completely blank level for me. Okay, so this is what we're going to use as the basis of our game this evening. Now, what I'll do to start off with, for those of you who might have watched my previous live streams, some of you might see some similarity between what I've done before and what I'm doing this evening. That's absolutely fine. We are just going to kind of cover everything again as a bit of a kind of, like, as I said, a throwback to the first session that I did a full year ago now. So just to kind of familiarise ourselves with Gamefruit to begin with, we've got along the side of the screen here our various packs. We're going to be using a pack which we will import in a second in order to build up our game. Effectively, these are like our assets, so these are all of the different things that you can import into the game in order to use them and make your levels as interesting as possible. We've also got the code tab. Now, those of you who are not signed in will notice that there are already a series of different scripts available to us. If we click on where it says Gamefruit Classic Pack, just to close all of those, and you can do the same thing on the media tab as well, just to get rid of all of that stuff that we don't need. We'll be using a different pack and our own scripts this evening, so we won't need to see those. The levels tab is where all of our levels are going to be. We're probably only going to have time to produce one level this evening, but the levels can also be thought of as being like stages. So the first level of the game will most commonly be the main menu in the case of Gamefruit. You can also have then a series of levels that make up, of course, the main bulk of your game that perhaps get progressively harder. And then you might have a level that represents the kind of final game window, like a you win screen, or you can have a level that represents a game over screen. So effectively, it's kind of like the stages rather than being actual levels. But we're only going to be working with one level today, and that's going to be the main level, the first level of our game. There is a toolbar just here. This toolbar basically has a series of options. We can use the mouse to select objects. The paintbrush tool there we will make use of in a short while to add things like different tiles or floor for our character to walk along. The T here inside of a square, that's a text box, so we can add some text into our game. We've got the eraser tool if we wanted to rub things out. And we've also got the hand tool, which allows us to, if we select it, we can use it to click and drag our way around the game's environment. Okay, you can also do that using the navigation tool just at the bottom of your screen. That allows you to zoom in and out as well, and also navigate sort of around the map if you so desire. Okay, so there are lots of different things there that you can do. We've also got the undo buttons that are just at the top of the screen here. We can use those to undo or redo our work. And we've also got the layers box, which is something that we're going to be covering in just a second. Okay, so hopefully that's all made sense, and it's just kind of like a bit of a basic introduction for you into the game. Okay.
Doesn't look too scary so far.
Perfect. Okay, that's good. That's good. So yeah, hopefully it hasn't come across as being too scary. There are. I know it's quite a new sort of environment, perhaps to a lot of you who are watching. But basically, it's just a lot of mainly just a lot of buttons. But I'll be going through everything. Just a reminder as well at this point before we move on, that if you are following along at home and you do have questions, you're welcome to post them in the chat. Nia will be watching the chat, so if you have got a question and you want to post it in the live chat facility, you're welcome to do so, and Nia will be able to let me know what those questions are. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start up our basic kind of level design. Okay, the first thing that we need to do is import a pack. Now you are welcome, if you so desire, to use the Gamefroot Classic pack if that is something that's appeared as an asset to you already. I'm going to use a different pack which you can get by clicking the Add New Media button and then click on where it says Explore Marketplace. Okay. Now, there are a series of options. Some of them, as far as I can remember, are paid. So you will have to pay for some of these. Not all of them. I believe, will tell you, I think, it will tell you if it is a paid pack. The one that I'm going to use is this bright blue file just on the bottom here. I'm going to click on that. And when I do that, you'll notice that there are a series of different assets that are displayed on the screen. And at the top it says Get for Free. I'm going to click on that Get for Free button. And what it's going to do is it's going to display that pack for me just along the left of my screen. So you'll notice now that I've got all of the assets from that pack just listed down the side of the screen here. So they are all available to me now, and I can use those within the game. So, one of the key concepts that Gamefroot has that we need to be aware of is this idea of layers. So what we have are various layers that are placed sort of one on top of the other. Now, we of course are going to need a layer for our background, and those of you who have started this from an unlogged in kind of starter template will notice that on the left in the layers box, in the right even, on the layers box, you've got the background layer probably already listed. What we're going to be working with today are 3 layers. So we've already got one for background. If you haven't got one for background, you can simply click on the plus symbol inside of the square and click new layer, and you're going to want to add one that says background. We're also going to want to add a new tile map. So I'm going to click new tile map, and then I'm going to right click on the tile map, and I'm going to say rename layer. Okay, and what you need to do is give the layer a reasonable name that will allow you to remember what it is. So I'm going to just call it floor, because this is going to be the floor that my player walks on. And you'll notice that when you've selected the tile map, it brings up kind of like a grid. And the purpose of the tile map is it allows us to have a more kind of precise placement of objects. So we have the ability to place things in a bit more kind of detail. Now we're also going to add another layer, which is not a tile map, it's just a normal layer. I'm going to click on that layer, and I'm going to again rename it, and I'm going to call it character. Now in future renditions you might choose to have another layer that represents things like objects or obstacles that you can place into your game. If there's time at the end, we might have an opportunity to do that. But for today we're just going to stick with the 3 layers. Okay. Now, one thing that's always important to keep in mind when we're using Gamefroot is that we've always selected the correct layer for what we need. In the first instance, I'm going to be on the background layer, and the reason being is because that's the first asset that I'm going to add to my game. Okay, I'm going to add a background. So whilst I'm on the background layer, I'm going to go across to my assets on the left here, and you'll notice that there is actually a series of pre-created backgrounds for us. So I'm going to choose one of these at random. It doesn't matter which one, it's entirely up to you. I'm just going to go with this one. And I'm going to position it in the top left of my screen. So what you're going to want to try and make sure is that it kind of touches the screen, the top left of the screen at the corners, so that there aren't really many white gaps that you can sort of see around the edges of the screen. It doesn't have to be too precise, but it just kind of helps when you're moving around the game that you don't kind of see the background shifting too much and just showing like white space. If you even wanted to, you could even have it sort of overlapping a bit. That can sometimes help to prevent the juddering and the white space as you're moving through the environment.
Really out of interest, Dan. So here we've got a pre-made pack from the marketplace. But if I was artistically inclined, is this the sort of thing that I could draw my own backgrounds and import them?
It's an interesting question, actually. I'm almost certain that you could potentially do something like that because there is an upload media button. I'm not 100% sure, but it probably would be an option. You can, of course, create characters and animations yourself as well. So I'd imagine that the option to produce your own background and upload it is something that will probably be there. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. That is a good question, actually. If anybody does know the answer, feel free to post it in the chat. So now that we've got our background, currently the game isn't really going to do much with this background. It's going to kind of be fixed. And the problem with it being a fixed background is that when you're moving through your level, what you'll find is that the background stays in one place and you move away from it. So you'll basically move just into a white void. Now, of course, one option would be to join several backgrounds together, just to make kind of like a continuous stream of backgrounds. But the problem with that is that, of course, you're going to end up with quite a cluttered kind of repeated background, and all of this space here is just going to be filled with the same image. So what we can actually do is make our own script to program the background. So what we're going to do is I'm going to right click on my background, and you'll notice now that an option has come up to add a script, and I'm going to click on that. And we're going to be brought into this window. Now this particular window will look quite familiar to a lot of you who have used Gamefroot before, or even to those of you who have used Scratch before, because what we've got here is a block-based programming environment where on the left of the screen here I have a series of menus, even Scratch blocks, okay, that I can use within my game in order to build up a script. Now these can of course do various different things, as you can see. Lots of different stuff, including the use of variables and stuff like that. I'm going to be only using a handful of these blocks today. We'll be focusing predominantly on these for 6 menus. We're going to be using some events. We actually won't be using any control flow, but we will be using some physics blocks, some transform blocks, some animation blocks, and some looks blocks. So we're going to be focusing on those blocks today. Now, for the background, we're going to add in a couple of blocks. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, actually, to make sure everybody can see it a bit better. We're going to be adding a handful of blocks that make sure that the background follows the character as it moves through the game. So the first block that I'm going to add is this when created block, which essentially will just be that when the background is created, so when the game first loads, we're going to have this background that's produced, and we're going to want to tell Gamefroot that we don't want there to be any physics attached to that background, because effectively what that can sometimes lead to is things like your character being able to actually push the background. So you will actually find that as you tell your character to move through the game, they can actually physically push the background and it will just shoot off into oblivion. Not ideal. Not an ideal scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually tell Gamefroot that we don't want there to be any physics attached to the background. So from that physics menu, if I scroll down right the way to the bottom, under the MISC menu, there's a block called Set Physics Enabled True. Now, I'm going to drag that, click it to being a part of when created, and I'm going to set it to being false. Basically, we're going to turn off the physics for that background. So now the background is not going to be affected in any way by physics. Okay.
Now, it's a very powerful block you've got there. If you can just turn physics off,
isn't it?
As that.
Isn't it? Yeah, it's an extremely powerful block. You can just basically turn it all off. No physics. Don't need it. In this context, which is quite crazy considering how important physics are, that you can just turn it all off with one block in Gamefroot.
Right, as a physicist by training, this is quite upsetting.
So what we also need to do is have a block or series of blocks that allow Gamefroot to follow the background through the game. So effectively, currently, the background is still fixed in one place. So what we want is the ability for the background to actually move through the environment as the player does. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a block from events called constantly. Now this block is basically identical to the forever loop that you would find in Scratch, just it's called constantly instead of forever. Okay. And all it's going to do is it's going to use a loop. Now, those of you who are familiar with loops in programming, effectively it's a way of repeating some code over and over and over and over and over again. Now, it can be a set number of times, or it can be an infinite number of times. In this case, of course, with a constantly loop, it's going to be an infinite number of times. Now, what we want is to have the game's camera follow the player through the environment, or have the background basically follow the player through the environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a block from transform, and it's this first block, conveniently, set X position of myself to 0, and I'm going to drag that in to being part of the constantly loop, and I'm actually going to duplicate it by right clicking on it and clicking duplicate, and I'm going to attach it to the same block underneath. Now, for those of you who are familiar with graphs and things like that, Gamefroot operates on a similar principle, and even Scratch actually, of X and Y coordinates, okay, and X and Y axes. And therefore, currently, what we need to tell Gamefroot is that there is an X and Y position of our background that it needs to follow. So we need to have one block that sets the X position of the background and one block that sets the Y position of the background, so it looks something a little bit like that. Now, when Gamefroot refers to this myself block, that's referring to the object that you're currently programming. So in this case, myself means the background. In a moment, we'll start programming the character, and in doing so, myself means the player. Okay, so when we're talking about myself, it's always referring to the asset that you are currently programming. So currently, the background is set to being constantly at position 0, 0. So X value 0 and Y value 0. And we don't want that, because currently that still means that the background's not going to move. So what we're going to want to do is actually take these blue zeros and we're going to throw them away into the bin just on the right of the screen. And what we're going to add instead is a block from looks called, we scroll down, camera X, and just this tiny block down here under camera. So looks, scroll down to camera and you'll find camera X. And again, we're going to want 2 of these, and of course one needs to be camera Y. So now we've got 2 blocks. We've got set X position of myself to camera X and set Y position of myself to camera Y. So effectively now the background is going to be constantly following the X and Y camera through the level. We need to save the script in order for it to run appropriately. Now you can either click the back arrow up here or you can hit the orange play button, and what it will do is it will ask you, do you want to save your script? And I'm going to say yes, and then it asks me for a name. So again, it's important to just give it something meaningful, so I've just called it background so I can remember what it's doing, and I'm going to hit save. Now this is then going to load a preview of your game. Now depending on how much you've got going on in your game, or how many things you've got running on your computer, or how strong your internet connection is, basically there are a whole bunch of things that can impact how long it takes the game to actually load in the preview mode. But generally speaking, you should see a screen like this. And currently the game is doing, well, not much of anything. It's just a background. Not the most interesting of games. I'm not sure if you'd agree, Nia.
I mean, I think we can do better.
I think we can do better. Yeah, no, I agree. So I'm going to hit the close button, and then I'm going to go back. So I'm going to hit the back arrow, and we're back here. Now, what you'll notice now, when I click on, I'll just go up a little. When I click on my background, in the top right now, it now tells me with a little jigsaw piece, and also down here in properties, that this asset has got a background attached to it. Okay, sorry, the background script attached to it. So effectively, I know when I click on an asset, if it's got a little jigsaw piece next to it, that means that there's a script tied to that object. So it's going to be doing something in essence. And again, that also comes up over here, and we can see, whoops, that the background script that we've produced is now a property of the background asset. So it's going to be following us as we go through the game's environment. Okay, so we've got our background, which is all good. But currently, as we've observed, the game isn't really doing much of anything. So we need to add a bit of a floor for the player to walk along, as well as an actual player. So I'm going to go to the floor layer, and it's important that you select the floor layer at this point, because if you don't, what you're going to end up with is a situation where you're trying to add a floor and it's just not doing what you expect it to do. And because of the way that Gamefroot is kind of set up, the layers are obviously going to be placed one on top of the other. So if you start placing things, let's just say you were to have placed the background in the character layer, it's going to mean that the background could be in front of the player. You're not going to be able to see what's going on, and oh dear, you don't want that. What you want is essentially a just always double check that you've selected the correct layer. So since I'm going to add some floor, I'm on the floor layer, and I'm going to scroll down through my media menu on the left here until I find the tiles. Okay, now depending on what pack you're using, they may be called something different, but you'll notice that there's actually a little like paintbrush symbol next to them, which means that we can link them all together and kind of make a coherent sort of pattern. for the floor. I'm just going to choose a random one, it doesn't matter which one. I've just chosen this one, and you'll see that that's now appeared in my game window. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down left click over a tile, and I'm going to just drag. And you'll notice that they all link together. Keeping a hold of left click, they'll all kind of link together. And this enables me to basically create some sort of basic environment, which the character is going to be able to stand on.
That's very satisfying. I like
Isn't
that
it?
a lot.
It is very satisfying. And you can just click and drag to your heart's content. And basically you can go as detailed as you like. So you can put some stuff up here. You could, go as wherever you like within the map. You are only limited by space to an extent. But you can add as much of the floor as you like. As we've only got half an hour left of the stream, I'm not going to spend too much time adding floor, but if you wanted to spend a bit of time kind of building up a bit of an environment, you're welcome to pause the live stream and come back to it once you've added all of your floor. But basically you can add as much as you like to your environment. You can even add sort of combine different tiles, and things like that. It is, as Nia said, particularly a very satisfying kind of thing, which you could spend, hours doing and perfecting. So I'm just going to add something that looks a bit like that, so that there's kind of like a bit of a cave style thing going on. There we go. Okay, so I'm now on the floor layer, so it's important to keep in mind at this point that we want to go to the character layer, because again, if I was trying to add floor on a different layer, it wouldn't join up properly, things would be kind of all over the place, and if I try and add a character to the floor layer, it's going to kind of get a bit higgledy-piggledy and it's not going to work. So always make sure that you've selected the correct layer for what it is that you're trying to achieve. Okay, so we've got our layers, it's all looking rather nice. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to add a character. Now, scrolling up through the media menu once again, you'll notice that we've got all of our players here. Okay, it's up to you which one you choose. I'm just going to go with this one, and I'm going to place the character within the world just there. So it doesn't matter where, again, you can place the character wherever you like, just as long as it's obviously a reasonable starting point for you, to make sure that you've got, an appropriate place for that character to be. And what we're going to do, once again, is we're going to add some scripts to the character. Now, some of you might have noticed that you can create a new script using the Code tab. And what you would need to do from there is click and drag your script onto the asset that you're programming if you make it in this section here. So if you were to click add new script here, your code script would appear here, but it wouldn't be assigned to anything. So the easiest approach, if you know what asset you're trying to program, is to either right click or click on the kind of purple circle that just appears when you hover over the asset, and then just select the add script option again. What that basically does is it ensures that when you produce a script, it is tied to a specific asset, and it means that you're not going to forget to click and drag it onto a particular asset. Okay, now what I'm going to do just as an example is I'm going to hit the play button, and you'll notice currently that my character is standing there, but there's nothing I can do with the character at all. I can't press any buttons on my keyboard, I can't click anything with my mouse, the character's just standing there. So we need to actually add a little bit of code now to get our character to move through the game's environment. So what we're going to do is, first things first, we want to add a little bit of code that will get us going in terms of adding some physics, you'll be pleased to hear, Nia, to our actual environment.
Good.
So, first thing we're going to do is, from the events menu, I'm going to add this when the level starts block. So it's going to be as soon as the level starts, as soon as we click that play button and we move into this level, all of this stuff is going to happen. And the first thing that we're going to add is some gravity. Again, we can do that from the physics menu, and you'll notice that there's a specific section for gravity, and I'm going to drag that block in, set gravity x 0. Now, of course, currently gravity is set here to the x-axis, which means that gravity is currently pulling the character from left to right, which is not how gravity traditionally works. I think you'd agree, Nia.
Yeah, normally it's an up-down thing, but I mean, if you can turn the physics off, who knows what's going
Exactly.
on?
Yeah, exactly. So we can actually, thankfully, change the gravity to being up and down by changing it to being a y gravity, and you can set the strength of the gravity. Now, of course, this is subject to the type of game that you're producing. You know, if it's going to be an outer space game, gravity can also be a lot weaker. A kind of reasonable value for kind of like Earth strength. You know, somewhere between 800 to 1200 is kind of a reasonable value for like an Earth style strength of gravity in Gamefroot. I'm going to go with the higher end 1200, but it is entirely up to you what you specify to be the strength of your gravity. And we want the character to have the ability to actually react to that gravity. So from the physics menu once again, if we scroll down, we have got to do a bit of scrolling here. Down to the MISC menu once again, we can set reacts to gravity to being true. So I'm going to use that block just inside there. That's going to switch on gravity for our player.
I can see that being a block that I would forget to use, and I would be playing my game and not understanding why my character was not reacting to gravity.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because you would sometimes often, I guess, assume that if the gravity switched on, that by default you would react to it, but you have got to explicitly make sure that every individual character can react to the gravity. Now, there is a block that I am going to take from Transform. It might seem a little bit strange and it might not make a lot of sense at first, but I'm going to use this block called Center Anchor Point of Myself, which is a bit further down in the menu. So from Transform, Center Anchor Point of Myself. That's also going to go inside of when the level starts. The reason being that that block basically kind of grounds the character a bit more, so that when you change direction, your character model doesn't basically flip wildly all over the place, and it kind of keeps them anchored, because otherwise you'll find that you can change direction and your character like flips wildly into one direction and suddenly you're much further ahead and clipping through the floor and things like that. So centering the anchor point basically just means that when you're rotating, from moving from left to right, your character's much more anchored and much more grounded. Now, the other thing that we need to do before we get into programming the movement is actually making sure that the camera is constantly following us throughout the game. Okay? Now, the way that we can do that is, as you'd expect, for using a constantly block. So we can use that constantly loop from before. So from events, we're going to take constantly, and we're going to use a new block now from looks, and we're going to scroll down until we find a block called from camera lock, center camera on myself, which is this block here. Now you'll see again this myself block cropping up once again. Remember, myself means, as it says there, this game object, so it's referring to the object that you're currently programming. So I'm going to add that to the constantly loop, which means now the character is basically being followed by the camera throughout the game. Okay, and that's also going to therefore apply to the background as well. Okay, once again, I'm gonna just hit play as a test. Remember, if you are doing this at home, to save your script. I'm just going to call this character this time. I'm going to hit save, I'm going to load, and again, now something seems to be going horribly wrong, and we'll see that we're actually falling through the floor currently into oblivion. So, there's a few things that we need to do in order to make sure that this doesn't happen. And I'm hoping that everything is going to work and that that doesn't happen after we've programmed our character movement. So, what we need to have are a series of blocks. So I'm going to go and actually start programming the character's movement. Okay. Now I'm going to go to events and I'm going to find a block called from keyboard when backspace delete is pressed. Now I'm going to need a total of 6 of these altogether. So I'm going to right click and duplicate so that I've got a total of 6 of these blocks. And effectively these 6 blocks are all going to be different movement controls for my character. So, dependent on what you feel most comfortable with, either the arrows or WASD, dependent on whether or not you're used to keyboard movement, we need to change what buttons are pressed in order to do particular things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change by clicking on the little arrow over the purple block where it says backspace delete. I'm going to change each one of these arrows to be doing something different. So I'm going to say that I need 1 block for the right arrow, 1 block for the left arrow, and 1 block for my up arrow. So that effectively now I've got some basic movement. I'm going right, left, and up for jumping. Now, currently the buttons on the left are all set to when the buttons are pressed. One thing that we're going to have to keep in mind is that we also need something to happen when the buttons are released, and we'll see why in just a second. But what we're going to do to start off with is we're actually going to program that character movement so that the character can actually do things. Now, currently I've got right, left, and up, and I need the character to be able to run right and left and jump up. Now, the way that we can do that is from physics. We can actually set a velocity. So from the motion menu, we can set a velocity. So I'm going to set a velocity for the right arrow. I'm going to duplicate that for the left arrow, and I'm also going to duplicate it for the up arrow, but of course currently the up arrow is set to an X velocity, which is left and right, and we want to be jumping up and down. So I'm going to set that to being a Y velocity. Now, the velocity of X and the velocity of Y are entirely up to you. It depends on how quickly or how slowly you want your character to be able to move through the environment. A decent kind of speed for the X velocity is 300. And that's going to be set for the right arrow, but because we need to move towards the negative axes when we're running to the left, we need to set our X velocity to being minus 300 so that it matches, but it's in the reverse. Now,
purely out of interest, what is the units here? Like, if you're saying 300, what does that mean?
It's a good question, which I'm not sure. It's just, it's pixels per second.
Pixels per second, okay, great.
Yeah, pixels per second, there we go. I just discovered this, hovering my cursor over the units. So it's pixels per second. Now, with the up arrow, we need to specify a value that will combat the gravity that we've already specified. Because, of course, at the moment, when we're going to jump up, the character's just going to jump. And it's not going to actually do anything because the velocity of Y is 0. So it's not going to have any energy to combat that gravity. Now we have to specify a negative value for this, which sounds slightly strange. But if you want a reasonable kind of jumping height, negative 500 is a reasonable kind of value to do that. Now, we also need to get our player to have the ability to actually do some kind of animation so that they're not just gliding from place to place. And the way that we can do that is using, from the animation menu, there's actually this play animation block. Now, those characters that you added, or that we've added from that pack, have got some pre-built animations that come as standard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate these blocks to make sure that all arrows have got an animation tied to them. And when I want my character moving from left to right, what I want the character to do is run, and the animation for that's tied to these characters is actually called run. So I'm going to add a run animation to my right arrow by changing what it says in the box to being run. And for the up arrow, surprisingly, I need to have a jump animation. And those are all pre-scripted. So Gamefroot will know what animation it needs to play from the character asset when a particular button is now pressed on the keyboard. Something else that we need to bear in mind as well is that we need our character to face the proper direction so that it doesn't look like they're moonwalking when they're moving in an opposite direction. So we're going to do that by going to transform once again, and we're going to be adding a block that's called set XY scale of myself to 1. Now I'm going to add 2 of these. One for the right arrow, one for the left arrow. We don't need one for the up arrow because the character will be facing the direction, hopefully the correct direction, when we're jumping. So therefore it doesn't really need to have a scale set to it. We don't want to set the X and Y scale because otherwise we're going to have the character that's basically flipping around upside down and doing all sorts of somersaults. So we can just set the X scale. Now, the value of 1 effectively means that the character is facing to the right. If we wanted the character to be flipped so that it's kind of like a mirror image, we can change the value of X, the scale of X, to being -1, and that will flip the character's image around. So it's kind of like a mirror image so that it looks like it does in reverse. So far what we've got are our blocks where when we press the arrow keys, we're going to move to the left or to the right at a specified speed. It's going to play an animation that makes the character look like they're running or jumping, and they're going to basically face the appropriate direction whilst moving. Now I'm going to hit the play button to see if this works. It might not, so we'll see how we go. It will ask you to save. Always make sure that you do save. Okay, so for some reason the character is still falling through the floor, which is an interesting thing that I've not encountered before. So I'm just going to go back and have a look at my code again and just try and figure out what's going on. And I think I know what the problem might be, but we can find out. So if you are having this issue at home, let's try and find out what the problem is. So this is an interesting one because I've not actually had this problem before. Are you having that issue at all, Nia?
No, if I'm on the like the floor tiles, I can walk across them absolutely fine,
Excellent.
and I'm not falling. So I don't know what the
out.
problem might
I
be.
have found the solution. I'd accidentally ticked that this was disabled. I'm not quite sure what this is, but I found the solution, so all is well. So let us go back
Excellent.
into the script. Now, for those of you who have managed to have success, what a lot of you might be noticing is that currently, character's running, character can jump, which is all hunky-dory, but we can't stop.
Yes, I'm having trouble keeping my character from falling into the abyss.
Absolutely. So this is an issue which we need to try and resolve. And the way that we're going to do that is by using those empty when certain arrow keys placed blocks. We're going to change these to basically match the first ones, but we're going to change them slightly so that way when instead of them being when the keys are pressed, we need them to do something when they are released. So once again, I'm going to change these to match up. So I'm going to have right arrow, left arrow, and up arrow. And instead of them all being set to being pressed, I want them to be released. Okay. So we're going to change all of these to being released. So now when we let go of those buttons, the character should stop what they're doing and go back to a certain state. Now at the moment, of course, they're not doing anything, but what we want them to do is stop. So the way that we can do that is by going back to the physics menu, having a scroll down to the motion section again, and setting their velocity to being 0, which is effectively meaning that we're setting their speed to 0, and that's going to stop them from moving in their entirety. So again, I'm going to duplicate that, and of course keeping in mind once again that when we are using the velocity block with the up arrow, we want it to be set to y velocity and not x velocity. Now that's all well and good, if I hit play, we'll notice now that the character is stopping. However, their animation is still basically running. So they just get stuck perpetually running, not going anywhere, but a bit kind of like Scooby-Doo in a way.
A tragic metaphor, I think, maybe.
So what we can do is we can just turn off essentially the animation that they were playing at the time of them running. So just from the animation menu again, we can reset their animations to being idle when the buttons are released. So again, we can drag that in, we can duplicate, and it can be the same for all three buttons, because of course we want them to just return back to that idle state once again, once we release that button. So in essence, what we should have now when we hit that play button is a character that can run, and when we let go of the button they stop moving and they flip to being facing the correct direction by using that scale block, and they're not wildly jumping from place to place. They might not always jump wildly, but if I just temporarily remove that center anchor point block from when the level starts, we'll see if it has any impact, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. But you'll notice that it isn't actually impacting my character in any way by not having that block there. But what you might find sometimes is that when you do change direction without that block, your character just flips wildly when you change direction, and you'll end up being standing here, you'll press the right arrow, and suddenly your character will just be clipping through the floor and falling into the abyss. So that block just kind of gives the reassurance that that's not going to happen, essentially. So we've now got all of these blocks. We've got a when the level starts, we're going to set the gravity to being switched on, we're going to center the anchor point of the character, and we're going to have the character constantly, having the camera constantly follow the character. We've also got these basic blocks for controlling the character. We've got the right arrow pressed and released, left arrow pressed and released, up arrow pressed and released. And of course we can do various different things, such as controlling their speed, their animation, and the way that the direction that they're facing, using a series of blocks that are part of those arrow key blocks. Now it's important to keep in mind, of course, that you need to save the game, save your scripts, so always make sure that you save them when you exit, because otherwise they will be deleted. Now, looking back at the game that I've got so far, we can notice that the scripts that I produce, they appear in the code tab along the top of the screen. All of the levels that I've got are specified in the levels section of the screen. And then of course all throughout the media tab I've got all of the various different assets. Now with the characters, if I wanted to see what other abilities my characters have got, I can right click on the character, hover over the actual character, and look at edit animation. Now in here, what we can notice is that there are actually a series of different animations that are available, subject to what you want your character to be able to do in the game. Now you have got the option, if you so desire, of actually adding more animations, which you can make yourself. But there are, a series of different animations here which you can watch. So that's just climb idle, but we've got, as you can see, this animation is 6 frames, and you can see that they can climb. There's a hitbox as well for defining where the character hits, and effectively those are the various assets that you've got within the game. Now the play button is of course still at the top of the screen when you exit out of it, so if you wanted to go back to playing your game without being in the script editor, you could just press that orange play button at the top of the screen, and then you can do various different things. Now if you have got an online account with Gamefroot, the Gamefroot sometimes, I'm not sure if it does it by default, but it does actually save your game to your online account. So effectively what that means is that it will be there. You can go to the file option at the top of the screen, click Save Game or Save Game As. That will allow you to save it and rename it to your online account. And that will sort of save it in like that cloud type thing. If you haven't got an online account with Gamefroot, you don't need to worry, because you can do this import and export option, where in essence you can export the game down to your local computer. When you do that, you won't be able to play it locally, but it means that you can still save a copy of your game, and if you just wanted to replay it, all you need to do is load up Gamefroot and then import the game again. So find where you've basically exported it to, and then you can re-import it once again and use it as and play it within the Gamefroot platform type thing. That is an option as well. Now, I mentioned as well at the start that I followed kind of one of Gamefruit's own tutorials in order to kind of host today's session, but Gamefruit have got a series of other tutorials. You'll notice that the tutorials tab here, just on the right of the screen, I nearly said left again, on the right of the screen, there are a series of various tutorials that you can follow. So what we've done today is, if I remember rightly, one of the intermediate resources, Platformer 101 tutorials. Basically, I followed kind of like the basic introductory tutorial. As you can see, coding a playable character and things like that, adding gravity. These are all the different things that we've done today. But if you're interested in adding more to your game, you can follow these tutorials. You'll notice that there are options of placing objects as obstacles, detecting the collision. We've also already done this part, coding a non-collidable background, so we've already got that. So that's something that you've already done. But there are loads of different tutorials, like keeping a score, throwing a projectile, scripting a moving obstacle, adding teleportation. Basically, there are tons of different things, and Gamefruit have got a series of tutorials out there that you can follow based on so many different things. There are starter projects, there are more activities, there are intermediate resources. There's lots. Including those top-down games that I mentioned before. Lots of different things that you can follow. And they've all been produced for as part of Gamefruit's platform that you can use. So we've got our game, we've got our basic platform, we've got some kind of basic character movement in place, and we've got our basic background. Since we are coming to the end of the live stream, what I would like to say is that now that you have this basic template, you are welcome to add to this if you wanted to. And use it in order to create some, really advanced game topics, if you so desired. We have, of course, I have got some other Technolive sessions on the YouTube channel, which have got various different concepts within there that you can follow, including I did do a tutorial, a video on how to add levels and stuff, which again followed Gamefruit's tutorials quite closely. So you could either follow that video if you wanted to, or you could look at Gamefruit's way of doing that. Effectively, there are a whole bunch of different things out there that you can do, like I said, using these various tutorials. So in order to wrap up today's session, just start by asking, actually, Nia, what did you think of Gamefruit?
Oh, I think it's lovely, and like having those animations already built in. Like the game looks so good already. You know what I mean? Like we've spent about an hour with all of these packs available. Yeah, I can definitely see that. Yeah, it looks very, very nice, very, very quickly.
It does.
I like that very much. Yeah.
Excellent. So, before we conclude today's session, then I'd like to thank you all very, very much indeed once again for joining in with us today. Just a quick reminder as well about the what we've got coming up, of course, next week. So remember, Monday, Jack's Techno Club will you'll be doing some mod trackers. So if you're a part of that, then you've got that to look forward to. Tuesday will still be an offline day due to something else taking place on a Tuesday afternoon. We have temporarily moved Technolive through to Thursday. Wednesday in my Techno Club, we will be looking at adding characters and some enemies into our games, into our text-based adventure game in Python. Remember, Thursday next week at 4:30, so same time next week, we will be doing AlgoBot, and on Friday we have got the various coding projects as part of that Techno Club. So,
and Jack is back.
and yeah, absolutely. Jack is back next Thursday. Absolutely, yeah. Jack is back next Thursday. So, once again, thank you all very, very much indeed for joining. Thank you as well to you, Nia, for taking part and for helping me out today.
No worries. Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed myself. I'll have to come again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, next week, usual time, we will be back with another Techno live stream. But until then, thank you all very, very much indeed for watching, and we'll see you very soon. Take care, everybody, and have a good evening.